past Sunday, millions of Egyptians took to the streets, marking the largest protest in the country's history. It was so large, in fact, it far surpassed the numbers that came out to oust Mubarak during the 2011 uprising. The widespread protests marked exactly 1 year since the inauguration of Mohamed Morsi, the country's first democratically elected president. But now, protesters are calling for his resignation. Already 5 cabinet members, as well as the country's foreign minister, have defected. And the country's military has given Morsi a 48-hour ultimatum to either bend to the will of the people or step down. But thus far, Morsi has rejected the army's demands, and as a result, the dissent has only continued to swell. So to talk about this latest uprising, what it signifies for Egypt and for the region as a whole, I'm joined by Ahmed Fathi, Egyptian-American journalist and columnist, joining us from New York. Ahmed, thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby, for having me.
So we've heard estimates that anywhere from 2 to 20 million people amassed in the streets this past weekend to call for the removal of President Morsi. Are these numbers accurate? Do you have a sense of who is actually taking part in the opposition?
The numbers I have is all the way up to 33 million, and this is based on analyzing the satellite pictures from Google Earth and other satellite companies, private companies, and it shows that there is an outpouring of the masses all over Egypt. This is an unprecedented step since the popular revolution in 1919, which embraces all Egyptians of all walks of life. They are united in one thing, that Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood regime should leave the country, should step down from authority and bring the country back to the people. Only 12 million people gave their votes to Morsi in the elections last year. If I take the number of 33 million, it's almost three times more than those who voted for him. The constitution has fallen with the uprising of the people. The legitimacy of Morsi is definitely not existing. He and his Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamo-fascist group, are the only one lingering to power, and they are not heeding to the power, to the will of the people.
You just said that the protests have been 3 times as many as actually voted for Morsi. As I understand, there was a petition as well circulated against Morsi, signed by 22 million people. I mean, that's over 1/4 of the country's population here. A lot of people are looking at that and saying, if there's so much opposition, why was he elected in the first place?
Because the Egyptians over the past 60 years have lost faith in the election process. We have never had a fair elections. Elections in Egypt were notoriously rigged for decades, so the common Egyptian doesn't really think that his or her voice would be counted at the end. Now, after 1 year under Morsi and the Islamo-fascist Muslim Brotherhood, the people have waken up and have realized that the situation in Egypt on every aspect is deteriorating. Economics, tourism is non-existent now.
Well, let's go into that. Let's go into that. As we know, Morsi inaugurated just 1 year ago. I mean, speak to what it's been like for the average Egyptian during the last year.
Egypt's economy depends greatly on the revenues generated from the tourist industry. And this have almost been non-existent. There were some tourists coming, but not in the original numbers. Tourism in Egypt is the largest employer. So imagine that we have at least 1/3 of the workforce have been laid off. Not those only directly working in the tourism area, but on other industries that support this mega industry. This is one. The remittances from the Egyptians working abroad, especially in the Gulf area, have declined. Some restrictions have been imposed by Gulf states on the numbers of visas offered for the Egyptian workers. Some inflammatory statements made by leaders in the Muslim Brotherhood against, for example, the government of the UAE, of course, have left a bitter taste in the throats of these governments. So we see a decline in that. Exports is another area. Egypt exports have been declining. Shortage in refined oil products and energy.
Right.
Egyptians now are going on regiments in electricity. Their hours of having electricity have been reduced.
Sounds like almost in every aspect of life things are deteriorating under this administration. But most recently, the military gave Morsi 48 hours to step down if he doesn't concede to the will of the people. What should we expect to happen after this time?
Let me put, before I start to comment to what is going to happen, that the military is being mandated by the masses to protect them, to regain control on the country again. I hear some leaks or rumors. Reuters ran a report that we should expect that the suspending of the constitution that's been passed by the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist groups, and the dismantling of the Shura Council, which is equivalent to the Senate there. Since the parliament have been dissolved by a ruling for the Supreme Court in Egypt, I think this is a step. The most realistic and logical scenarios, there is two. One, to form a transitional presidential council consists of 5 persons. The Chief Justice from the Supreme Constitutional Court, a representative for the military establishment after the approval of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, a liberal person, a leftist person, and a person from Al-Azhar, which is the religious establishment in Egypt. This is one way of looking at it. The second scenario is to have the council with the military and the constitutional court representatives, plus a technocrat experts, like somebody to be in charge of the foreign affairs, somebody to be in charge of the domestic affairs, and a third person to be in charge of the economic affairs. All this in anticipation of rewriting the constitution by constitutional law experts and professors, submitting it to the nation for referendum, and then holding parliamentary and presidential election at the end.
Right, and as we know, I mean, the constitution that Morsi brought, I mean, incited a number of complaints from women to religious minorities who felt like they were being disenfranchised under the new administration. Women
have been brought, in spite that Egypt has a relatively good record in women's rights, but under the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi's constitution, women has been minimized to just a container for making babies. So that's in a nutshell, and I'm very sorry to put it that way bluntly, but it's the reality and it's the facts on the ground.
Well, that's a travesty. And I mean, are these protests about a move towards secularism, equality, and really what will that move mean toward the region at large?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. This movement, if it succeeds, I can say to the political Islamic project, goodbye and sayonara. This shall be the end. We shall see repercussions in Gaza, where Hamas, a subgroup of the Muslim Brotherhood, is ruling there. We shall see repercussions in Tunisia, in spite that the Tunisian president came and said Tunisia is not Egypt. Reminds me of what Mubarak said by the time of the Egyptian revolution, that Egypt is not Tunisia. It can have repercussions in Libya, and it is a rehearsal to what's going to happen in Syria if the Islamists reach power after removing of Bashar al-Assad. If they succeed, of course.
And of course, I just wanted to get your quick comment on this. We have about a minute left, but of course we're hearing, this is a coup either from the Mubarak regime or the military. What's your response?
I don't think that the Mubarak regime or the military have the power to mobilize 33 million people. This is unprecedented in the history of Egypt, with the exception of the 1919 revolution. So it's definitely not realistic to take it in this manner. It
is amazing to see so many people pouring out in the streets demanding a referendum. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing some insight on the situation. Ahmed Fathi, Egyptian-American journalist and columnist.